Hey guys, I'm Katie,
I'm Ryan.
and you're listening to The List, where we're watching IMDb's top 100 greatest movies of all time, and we're letting you know which ones are bucket list movies and which ones are chucket list movies. Today we are discussing 1969's Midnight Cowboy. Yeehaw!
Kind of. So, for those of you who have not seen Midnight Cowboy, it is number 71 on our top 100 list, and it is directed by John Schlesinger?
Schlesinger.
Schlesinger.
That's how I'd
Schlesinger.
say it.
One of those.
Yep.
Sorry if I butchered your name.
Sorry, John.
Little synopsis here. Texas Greenhorn Joe Buck, played by John Voight, arrives in New York City for the first time with intentions of meeting women and making his fortune. This self-proclaimed hustler finds that he's the one being hustled until he teams up with a down-and-out but resilient outcast by the name of Ratso Rizzo, played by Dustin Hoffman. This unlikely country city duo progresses from partners in shady business dealings to real-life friends while struggling to survive in New York City. That's the nice synopsis of this movie.
Were there mean synopsis?
It could have been, there's some other dark and sinister undercurrents in this film, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But let's go into our fun facts, which are not so dark and sinister.
Carry us away.
So, fun fact number 1. This movie was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, and it won 3 for Best Director, Best Writing, Best Screenplay based on another medium, and Best Picture. Number 2, before auditioning for Rizzo, Dustin Hoffman asked the auditioning film executive to meet him on a street corner in Manhattan. He dressed up like a beggar and harassed people on the street just 10 feet away from the executive until he finally went up to him and revealed himself as Dustin Hoffman. He had no idea that it was him.
That was one of my fun facts for today.
Was it?
Actually, yeah. Because Dustin Hoffman filmed this in The Graduate within 2 years. And so he had this kind of like all-American persona. And they were like, I don't know that you can do this. And so he was like, bet. Meet me on the street corner.
Yep. And so it must have worked because he got the part, right?
Right.
Fun fact number 3 is there's a very famous quote from this line, not given by Robert De Niro, which we thought for some reason. I don't know why.
I don't know either. And it's weird that Rizzo is the character that says this. I don't know. I feel like that line to me was always very tough. And Rizzo is not, I don't know what I think.
He is. He is.
Yeah.
He plays this like undercurrent little Weasley dude, but deep down he's like this.
Yeah.
He's a tough dude. He's got to be to go through all the stuff that he's been through.
For sure.
But that line is, I'm walking here. I'm walking. Right?
I'm walking here. So I did see that Dustin Hoffman says that taxi driver was not supposed to be there, that he had gone around caution tape, and it was a impulsive decision he made to say that. But I have also read that the director says it was intentional. So
this is what I've seen in multiple places and read, is that they could not afford to block off the street in production. Mm-hmm. So they were filming without a permit from down the street in a van, and he wanted it all done in one shot. And so they didn't have traffic blocked off, so it was real traffic. And so as they were crossing the street, the taxi cab driver tried to beat the light, and somehow he remained in character and just slaps the hood of the car and yells, I'm walking here, I'm walking. And when they caught it, the director loved it so much that he made them redo it in that time and 2 takes. And and do it. So I don't know if the original I'm walking here is the improvised in character part, or at least it was inspired by the beginning part.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure, but from everything I'm reading, I think it is. And then they ended up shooting the rest of the scene afterwards.
I've gone back to watch it a couple of times since we saw the movie, and it's interesting to me the way his voice changes, because he has a very distinct voice in this movie. And his voice goes from kind of nasally to really deep and intense. And I wonder if it was that they caught the improvisation and aired that. And that's Hoffman switching into his real, like, screw you voice. But from everything we've read about Dustin Hoffman, he seems like a very, what do they call that when you're in character acting all the time? Immersive acting, but that's not what they call it. But it seems like he really gets into his role and doesn't let go of it. So I'm just curious. I do find it interesting how his voice changed when he said that.
From an interview in Vanity Fair that I read, that his brain thought to himself, stay in character.
Yeah.
And he did. And he says he did. So that's what we're going to go with.
I
think
that.
He's still in character for his character.
For sure. Yeah.
But to remain in character and after almost getting run over, that's pretty impressive, to say the least.
I would have remained in character if my character was someone who screamed and cried.
Fast fact number 4 was Rizzo put real pebbles in his shoes to make sure his limp was consistent throughout the film.
That's the stuff I'm saying that Dustin Hoffman does. He fully commits to a character. I read that too, and I wasn't surprised at all. I was like, of course he did. And that's why he's steadily becoming like my favorite actor ever. I love him.
He's fantastic.
Yeah.
This is number 3 out of the top 100 that we've seen him in already.
Yeah. I mean,
I
think
a major role.
Not only is he a gifted actor, he also works really hard at it and really dedicates himself to his role and gives it his all. I love that. But this is not a podcast about how much we love Dustin Hoffman. I guess I'll leave it at that. It could be.
It could be.
And I just wanted to add on to your fun facts. You said that this movie won 3 Oscars. And when it went to the Oscars, it was rated X. It was the first movie to ever be rated X and win an Oscar. And after the Oscars, I forgot what you call it, the committee that rates movies came to them and said, if you will get rid of like one thing, we don't care what it is, we just need you to cut something so that we can say this is a cut version or a new version. If you'll do that, we'll give you a rated R rating. And Jon Voight was like absolutely against it. He said, absolutely not. The movie was filmed the way it was filmed. It won an Oscar this way. We're not cutting it and re-releasing it so you can give us an R rating. And eventually they did give them the R rating anyway, but they did it without cutting anything. So I thought that was interesting.
I did see that they cut 25 minutes from the television version.
Yeah, probably. I imagine.
And gave it a rated R that way.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the film. Let's talk about the story. What did you think about the story, Kate?
I think on the surface, it's a story about somebody who wants to start a life in New York City. And that sounds like...
As a gigolo.
Yeah. They don't call it that, though. They call it a hustler. Is that right?
He's a gigolo. He wants to be a gigolo. Like, what human being aspires to be a gigolo?
That's what you're going to New York City for.
I'm going to go make it big in the big city.
He was like, I'm sick of washing these dishes. Big gigolo. I'm sick of washing these daggone dishes. I'm going to go find me some women in New York.
Yeah.
His character was really hard to relate to, because the story is about somebody who just up and decides to move to New York City to be a hustler and thinks out of all the people in New York City, he's the one who's going to go do it and do it well. And he's going to be like the A+ star hustler of New York City because of his cowboy get up. It's a weird story, right? That part of the story is very weird.
Well, that's kind of why I said he's greenhorn. He's pretty inexperienced.
Yeah.
Not only in the profession that he wants to go into, but in life in general.
he's got a weird outlook on life, and he's got a weird approach to life.
Well,
Um,
and we see in the story kind of why, because he has a weird childhood.
yeah,
There's some
yeah.
weird
There are really
tension between his mother,
undertones.
and
Yeah,
it makes me think he was abused as a
yeah,
child, and that's kind of why he thinks the way that he thinks.
right. And they don't come out and say that, but it is so hard to watch this movie. And that's one of the reasons this movie was a really hard watch for me, is because they made it really clear that he was abused by his grandmother. And it was a rough watch. Story wise, I did not, I don't know, like you're watching him go and try to make it as a hustler, as he calls it. And that's whatever. Like, I wasn't super invested in that part. The story really became something I cared about when he met Rizzo and confronted him for the second time and basically was going to beat the crap out of him after Rizzo stole his money. And it morphed from like a story about a guy trying to make it in New York City to a story of friendship of two people who had never been properly loved in their life, caring for each other and taking care of each other in the big city. And it really became a story about friendship. Um, they had, neither one of them had ever felt true safety, and I think they really found safety within each other, and no judgment, and just unconditional support. Um, but I say that, and that makes it sound like it's going to be this movie that you watch about two friends supporting each other. But boy, this was a hard watch. This
Yeah,
was a tragic movie.
it's mostly dark undercurrent the
Yeah.
entire film,
Yeah.
except for the friendship part.
Yeah. The
That's the only
friendship is the
part that is
only.
kind of redeeming. The world all around them is dark and gritty and
Right.
disgusting
Right.
and harsh
Right. And they're
and
kind of each
lonely,
other's
and it's just
touchstone.
them.
Yeah.
And so that's really, to me, there's the main redeeming part of the movie.
I don't know. The story is tough for me because I didn't enjoy it. I did not enjoy this story. Really, the only redeeming part for me is the friendship, and I just don't particularly love a dark movie. So, objectively looking at it, story wise, it's a very well written story. It has nuance. It has many layers. Objectively, it's a at least an 8.5. Um, but I didn't really enjoy it.
No, I think you're right. It's a tough watch, just because the subject matter that, and it's mainly the subject matter.
Yeah.
If you're a person who likes gritty realism, a lot of profanity, if you know, this is gonna be a rough watch for you if you're not one of those people.
Yeah, and I think, just to say, I do think it was an accurate picture of what life is like in the late 60s in New York City. So I think it was accurate. Real world is right, is what I guess I'm interjecting to say. It was very real world.
Probably, but I agree. I think the way the story develops around the friendship, that's really the crutch of this movie that carries it through and makes you care about the character development as it progresses. Otherwise, not a lot of interest, except for some sad and somewhat dark, humorous events that happen along the way. But I think the relationship with the two main characters, Rizzo and Joe Buck, is done nicely. And I think it's probably 8.5 for me as well.
Yeah.
What about the acting? Let's talk
The
about that.
acting in this movie is some of the best acting I've seen in the past few movies. First off, you cannot go wrong with Dustin Hoffman. I don't there's no fault in this movie on his part. It was extraordinary acting. He did a wonderful job. Jon Voight,
You didn't even realize it was Jon Voight.
I did not.
Until
We got to the end of the movie.
Like way deep into the movie, and I
No,
was like, "What?"
Ryan, I think the movie was over.
It
And I
was
think the
almost over.
credits were rolling. And I said, that was John Voight.
You may be right.
It didn't look like him to me.
Well,
And the
it did
second,
look like him to me, but like he didn't act like John Voight that I've seen in other
okay,
movies.
so I
To me,
think
he was a
that,
different character, and so that along with I've never seen him in a movie so young. I think that and the way he was acting was so different that it was hard for you to connect that that was the same person.
yeah.
And I
And
think that in itself is a tribute to how well the acting was.
I don't think I had seen John Voight in anything before. I've seen pictures of John Voight, old, but I don't think I've ever seen him in a movie.
You, if you've watched the movie in the last 10 years, you've seen him in
Old.
it. You just may
Yeah,
not have
maybe I've just
realized.
seen him old and never seen him young. But this character was weird. John Voight's character is weird. He has strange mannerisms. He reacts strangely to things. And this isn't a criticism. I'm just saying it was weird to me. He was a weird kid. But that was purposeful, I think.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by weird mannerisms and things like that. And the way he reacted to things was weird.
So the main character wasn't strange to you?
I mean, we've already said he's weird in the fact that he wants to become a gigolo.
Yeah.
So that's weird. He's super naive.
Yeah, but not naive in the way that you expect.
Super Southern polite to me as well. And like Southern polite and rough New York City is not a good mix for a person like him.
Yeah.
And I think that was done great.
Yeah, no, this is
I
not
had
a
no
criticism
qualms whatsoever with that. I thought that was all 100% believable. So I'm wondering what you thought was the weird mannerisms and stuff.
I'm not saying that is a criticism. I'm not saying, oh, he was so weird it was unbelievable or so weird it was unwatchable. He just was a strange character to me.
They're both strange characters. They are
but
Slim Dogs.
Rizzo wasn't a strange. See, maybe that's why.
Rizzo was
listen,
weird.
But listen, maybe this is why. When you look at Rizzo, he is dirty.
He's the dredges of society there. And maybe John Voight doesn't look like the dredges, but he is.
Yeah, so I think you've touched on what I'm feeling is like he doesn't look like he should be living in a condemned home in New York City. And he also doesn't act like it to me for quite a while. And I think that maybe is what was weird to me. And obviously that's intentional. Obviously you're supposed to be seeing him come in wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and clean. He works so hard to keep that jacket clean and keep his boots clean. Yeah. And so maybe that's what it was to me, was the juxtaposition of the way he dressed and carried himself versus where he actually fell in New York society, which was living in a condemned building.
Yeah, well, I think that is consistent with his character.
Yeah.
And you don't see that change until he physically changes out of his clothing towards the end when they're going to Florida.
Yeah.
And he fits in great with the Florida people because he's assimilated that.
Yeah.
That mix between the two worlds.
Yeah. So I'm going to say the acting in this is probably a 9.7 for me, maybe even a 9.8. This is wonderful acting.
Both of which Dustin Hoffman and John Voight were nominated for Best Actors. Unfortunately, neither one of them got it.
Didn't they lose out to?
I'm not sure who they lost to that year.
Who would you say was the biggest cowboy of all time in the movies? John Wayne.
John Wayne.
I think they lost to John Wayne that year, which is funny because he was playing a cowboy. But I don't know, maybe that's not right. So again, not a criticism, just a strange character, I think. And unexpectedly strange to me. I don't know. But I would say, yeah, the acting was incredible.
I'm about to see who won Best Actor here.
Okay.
In 1970.
Do it.
George C. Scott for his role as General George Patton in Patton.
Yeah, I think that's what I read.
That's what it was.
Yeah, which is basically the same thing as John Wayne. I don't know. I feel like that's exactly the same. So I was technically right.
Yes, sure.
What did you think about the acting?
Oh, phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal from both sides. Dustin Hoffman, amazing. John Voight, I thought was amazing as well.
Yeah.
I I think this is top tier acting.
Yeah.
9.8.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I mean, I'm at the point where there's if you told me Dustin Hoffman was in something, I'm watching it. I don't care what it's about. I don't care what genre it is. I'm watching it.
He's one of those characters that he's like a Gary Oldman.
Yeah,
Like
chameleon.
if he wants to, he can be a chameleon and you will not recognize him
Yeah.
until the very end if he wants
Apparently,
that.
so can John Voight.
Apparently. Great acting.
Yeah.
What about cinematography?
The cinematography in this, do you know what it was reminiscent of to me?
What's that?
Taxi Driver.
Yeah,
It
it's
gives
very
that
artsy
same
kind of
gritty,
vibe like that.
yeah, but not only is it artsy, it's very gritty. I feel like that's a hard thing to capture the right way. Like, it's not like Batman in Gotham kind of gritty. It's very real world New York fever dream. It was like a fever dream to me sometimes, the cinematography. The movie in general felt a little fever dreamish, honestly,
And
but
especially towards the ends when they get into the party and the drugs
yeah. Yeah.
and then it gets really kind of artsy and loopy, kind of like Taxi Driver did.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this story is told in the cinematography. Instead of relying heavily on telling you exactly what happened, you get little snapshots of the past of
Mm-hmm.
seeing the grandma, and the grandma doesn't say anything wrong, but the cinematography tells you that there's something sinister in their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
They don't tell you that he was with a woman who got assaulted and that was his experience with
Oh yeah, I
sex,
forgot about that.
right? Like that's his relationship with sex, is him being assaulted and then being with a woman who ends up getting assaulted in front of him,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of explains his relationship with sex in the movie. But I feel like a lot of this story is told in cinematography, and on top of that, it's just a cleverly and artistically shot film. And I think it's been a while, but I'm giving the cinematography a 9. It was pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's where it shines in this movie is some of the cinematography, the way it tells the story, the elements that are brought in. It's up there. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, a 9 for me. What is the wow factor in this film?
I think we're going to have the same wow factor in this film. The wow factor is a combination of the acting and the friendship that's told. I think it's just beautiful. The director and the writer made something so beautiful blossom in such a, a
Ugly world.
hellacious atmosphere.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just the beauty of their relationship, and then the vulnerability of Rizzo as he's very ill, the way he's so vulnerable with his friend and, breaks down and tells him how scared he is. I don't know. I'll say it a million times, but I just feel like we don't have enough vulnerability of men in media, and we don't have enough male friendships where they rely on each other and have each other emotionally and physically and mentally. And I just thought it was really beautifully done in this movie. And
It's interesting that you've said that. This is probably the third time that you've said
yeah,
that. And so in the top 100, that relationship has been there at least in 3 films that
it
we
makes you
can
wonder.
specifically
So I feel,
identify.
are you saying that it means it happens more than I think it does, or that it's so touching when it does happen that it,
I think when it's done right, there's
yeah,
something really special about that film that brings it up to the
I think
top
so
100.
too.
And I think you're right, though. I don't think you see it that much
No,
in film. But in these, it's done so cleverly that it elevates the film to
it
another
does.
level.
The friendship in this film, I mean, it made it. It made this movie for me.
Yeah, I think that's the wow factor, and cinematography for me is the other
Yeah.
wow factor, and the
And
acting.
Dustin Hoffman.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really great.
This is the best acting I've seen from him. It's hard against
Yeah, I
Rain
mean,
Man.
he's great. Rain Man, he was great in Rain Man too.
Yeah.
Amazing. I don't know if I could say it's the best, but it's way up there.
That wow
I
factor for me, by the way, is a 10.
Okay, 10. Yeah, I think I'm not quite a 10. I think I'm 9.7 though.
Yeah.
9.7.
Do you
So
do you think it's a top 100 movie?
I think it probably is. I think it's probably groundbreaking. I see the merit in this movie.
Yeah.
So in that aspect, I think it's a top 100 movie of all time. Is this a bucket list movie though? For me, no.
Okay.
For me, no. And it's probably just because it's so rough in
It's a
parts.
hard
It
movie
brings
to
down the
watch.
enjoyability of the movie.
I
This is
didn't
not a
enjoy.
movie for the faint-hearted. It's not a
Mm-mm.
movie for children, definitely.
No.
It's not a movie for people with who suffered abuse, probably.
Yeah.
It's this movie's not going to be a bucket list movie for a lot of people just
No.
because of the rough nature of the film surrounding it. And that's probably the only reason I would say this is not a bucket list movie. If it weren't in this setting, then maybe it would be,
Yeah.
for me anyway. But I see how important it is in film.
Yeah.
It's pretty unique from any other movies that we've seen in that aspect. Tackles difficult subject matter, and then it also has kind of a beautiful relationship between two friends. Is this a top 100 for you?
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely a top 100 movie. I think it's a little overrated. Um, Not at the time it came out. I know it was groundbreaking and revolutionary, but at this point in time, I think it might be a little overrated. However, I do think it's a top 100 movie. It's an incredible movie. It's well acted, it's well shot, it's got a great story. It's a good movie. So, top 100, yeah.
And is it a bucket list movie for you?
No, definitely not. I did not enjoy this movie at all. And that's nothing against the movie. It's just not the type of movie I like. It was very, very difficult to watch. So I'm not going to share my screen. Are you?
Yeah, I hate to not put it in the top 10, but for me, it's just not as enjoyable as some of the other films,
Yeah.
even though there's a lot of merit in some of
Yeah.
it. But
I feel like if
it's
this
not a top
movie,
10 for me.
if it would have come earlier, I probably would have put it on my list. But as my list is right now, there's not even any point in pulling it up. I didn't enjoy this movie, so I'm not gonna put it on my top 10. So if you're not following us on Ryan and Kat's list, we are on Instagram. You can follow us there. Leave us a message. We're happy to read them on air. I did want to say that just before we have a tiny little spoiler section. So if you haven't seen the movie, I would stop here. Spoiler alert, spoiler
Spoiler,
alert.
spoiler, warning.
I did want to say this is probably one of the most beautifully ended movies I've ever seen. Um, so throughout the whole movie, Rizzo's talking about going to Florida. He gets very ill, and Joe is just kind of like, I'm going to get him to Florida. So he puts him on a bus. They start going to Florida. They just almost make it there, and Rizzo dies on the bus.
I think they cross the border and then he
Yeah,
dies.
they're in
Yeah.
Florida, but he's not quite, there to get off and see the beach. And he dies. And there's this beautiful moment where Joe just realizes he's dead and has to lean over and close his eyes for him. And he touches his friend in death and closes his eyes and sits next to him. And I think, I don't know, I think we all hope we have somebody in our lives who would shut our eyes for us and sit next to us in death. You know what I mean? And and be there at the end. And I don't think that at any point in his life, Rizzo had that. I don't know that if Joe hadn't come into his life, he would have had anyone who would have sat there with him or frankly even cared that he was gone. Would anybody have noticed? And so while it's so difficult that he died, I really wish he wouldn't have died. I wish he could have had a happily ever after. I don't think it would have happened for him. I think he would have tried to grift in Florida, and it would have been just as hard there. But while he didn't have that happily ever after, I'm so happy that he had Joe there next to him and somebody in his life, no matter how short of a time, who cared that he lived and that he died and who sat next to him. That's a hard thing to sit next to somebody who's passed. And I don't know.
Yeah,
I just thought it was really beautiful.
I think the bus is kind of symbolic.
Yeah.
Like your journey through life, and then it ends. And at least you have somebody to ride with you.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think you're right. No one, if they had been in New York, would have batted an eye at him laying dead on the street.
No, they would have walked straight past him.
But he did end up having a friend, somebody who cared about him and helped him realize his dream, because his dream was to go to Florida.
And he did
to get out of New York and go to Florida. And he helped him realize that.
Yeah.
And what a great friend.
Yeah.
That's what a real friend is somebody who helps you achieve your dreams. And in a lot of ways, Rizzo's dream became Joe's dream as well.
Yeah.
And so he was able to go and kind of carry on that dream, even though he wasn't there.
Yeah. And
physically.
I think it really transformed Joe from this naive person kind of blundering through life into somebody who kind of now knew what the harshness that life could bring, and that he had to kind of buck up, no pun intended, and get to it and live life for his friend. And I don't know, it really was a beautiful movie. Sad.
That pun was intended. I don't care what you say.
You have to be modest and say pun not intended. But I just thought that was a beautiful scene. So again, the fact that this movie isn't on my bucket list or on my top 10 is no fault of the movie. It just comes down to enjoyability for me. And it just was too rough overall for me to enjoy that much.
Agreed.
But I appreciate it. I really do appreciate it.
Agreed.
It's art. Next week, we're going to be talking about
film number 70. I don't know what it is.
It's going to be a surprise to all of us, so make sure to tune in next week. Thank you guys for joining us for another week. We can't wait to see you again next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.
See ya.
Everybody's talking at me.